Tonight, there is nothing you need to prove. You do not need to stay alert, or take notes, or hold every detail in place. You only need to let the modern room around you grow a little softer, while an older room appears inside your mind. It is England, in the year 1875. Dawn has not fully arrived yet, and a respectable Victorian house stands in a line of dim roofs beneath a pale and waiting sky. Its windows are curtained. Its chimney breathes out the last patient thread of smoke from a banked fire. Its hall clock is measuring the darkness in small, unhurried clicks. For the next little while, you are not rushing toward history. You are simply drifting into it, as gently as one steps into a quiet room where somebody else is already asleep. If it helps, imagine that the night around you has become still enough to hear your own breathing. The day you are about to enter belongs to another century, but it does not need to feel sharp or difficult. You are not here for a challenge. You are here for atmosphere, for the soft weight of curtains, for the smell of beeswax and coal, for the cool porcelain shine of a washstand bowl, for the hush of carpeted stairs, and the small rituals that once held an ordinary life together. There will be chamber pots and boot hooks, and too many layers of clothing, yes, but there will also be tea steam turning white in the morning air, and fires being coaxed back to life, and quiet rooms where time seems to move more slowly than it does now. You may listen to all of it the way one listens to distant rain, letting it pass without effort. And if you would like a tiny, hidden little ritual of your own, you can imagine leaving a quiet like beneath this story, and then forget even that. The house is already waiting. You arrive first in the front hall, because every Victorian day begins with the house itself. Before breakfast, before clothes, before conversation, there is the building, half dark and full of expectation. The floorboards are old enough to complain in several tones. The wallpaper is patterned in a vine that once looked fashionable and now looks faintly solemn in the low light. A carved stand holds umbrellas and walking sticks. A row of pegs supports coats that smell of damp wool and road dust. Somewhere deeper inside, a fire has been stirred, because the air carries a fresh ribbon of coal smoke under the cooler smell of old wood and stone. Everything here seems to have weight. The curtains are heavy, the sideboard is heavy, the framed portraits on the wall are heavy not only in the hand, but in the expression. Even silence feels upholstered. This is not a manor in the grand aristocratic sense, but it is a solid, prosperous house, the kind built by people who have done well enough to display steadiness. Perhaps the owner made his money through trade, or law, or shipping, or railways, or some branch of industry respectable enough to speak of in company. The house is not ancient, yet it already wants to feel established. That is one of the most Victorian ambitions of all, to turn recent prosperity into the appearance of permanence. The carpets are thick enough to muffle quick footsteps. The staircase bends upward with polished determination. Brass catches what little light there is and turns it warm. A clock on the landing gives a small, precise click, then another. The entire place feels like an arrangement made to reassure the world that order lives here. And yet, even in the half-light, you can sense how much of that order must be maintained by constant human effort. A bell wire disappears into the wall. A coal scuttle waits beside a grate. A tray, left ready on a side table, suggests a coming movement of cups, saucers, letters, gloves, and newspapers. The house is full of systems that do not run themselves. Heat must be fed, water must be carried, ash must be removed, lamps must be trimmed, carpets beaten, boots cleaned, silver polished, breakfast planned before the sky has even finished brightening. The Victorian home could look serene from the right angle, but serenity here was never automatic. It was manufactured by habit, labor, and the stubborn refusal to let household life appear messy in public. Now let the hall blur for a moment, because the real day begins upstairs. You are waking in a guest room where the fire burned low in the night and the blankets have done their best against the cold. The bed is tall, the mattress firm, The pillows substantial in the old-fashioned way, more supportive than forgiving. The curtains around the window are drawn almost closed, leaving a narrow seam through which dawn leaks in as a bluish gray. Above the mantel hangs a small print in a gilt frame, too dim to examine. A chair by the hearth holds folded garments laid out in expectation of the morning. There is a washstand beside the bed, and a pitcher beside the basin, and a little dish of soap that looks entirely convinced it is sufficient for all human needs. For one small sleepy moment, before memory catches up, you look for the familiar invisible conveniences of your own century. A switch, a radiator, a bathroom door, hot water already waiting in the pipes, the soft rectangle of a phone on a bedside table. None of them exist here. What exists instead is arrangement. The room is quiet, but not silent. Wind moves faintly around the window frame. From somewhere below comes the distant rattle of a poker in a grate. Then the muffled sound of someone crossing a passage with purposeful steps. The house is waking from the bottom up. The family still lies in bed. Or pretends to, while the machinery of comfort is already being assembled below stairs. Fires are revived before faces are washed. Coal is lifted before curtains are opened. Water is heated before teapots are filled. It is one of the clearest truths of a well-run Victorian household. What seems effortless upstairs begins in labor downstairs. You sit up slowly, letting the blanket fall from your shoulders, and the air meets you at once with that particular morning chill known to rooms that have no central heating and too much dignity to apologize for it. The floor beside the bed is colder than the blanket by several centuries. Even the water in the pitcher looks cold by appearance alone, as if it spent the night rehearsing its own unpleasantness. But the day will not wait for comfort. Victorian domestic life begins by asking the body to adapt. The washstand is simple and ceremonious at the same time. There is a pitcher of water, a porcelain basin painted with a blue edge, a folded cloth, a hairbrush, a small tray for pins, a comb, the soap dish, and a little mirror that flatters no one. In another age, this arrangement was not primitive. It was ordinary. Entire mornings began and ended at just such a stand. You pour the water into the basin, and the sound it makes is thin and decisive, too cold even to pretend otherwise. When the wet cloth touches your face, the shock is immediate. Your skin tightens, your breath catches. The century greets you not with warmth, but with bracing honesty. Still, there is something strangely calming in the sequence of the ritual. Cloth into water, water to face, soap to hands, towel to skin, brush through hair, tooth powder on the brush. The actions are limited, repeatable, almost meditative. You begin to understand how routine once carried more comfort than luxury. In a world where temperature, privacy, and bodily ease could not be taken for granted, there was reassurance in simply knowing what came next. The basin waits where it should, the towel hangs where it should. The day may demand much, but at least it follows a pattern. Tooth cleaning in this century is not the frothy, pleasant little invention you know. There is no mint, no soft foam, no easy sense that chemistry has been arranged for your delight. There is tooth powder, chalky and practical, perhaps flavored with something faintly medicinal if you are lucky, and a brush whose bristles have a more serious understanding of the human mouth than you do. Dental care for most Victorians was inconsistent, uncomfortable, and often postponed until pain became unavoidable. In the safer glow of hindsight, the little act of brushing at the washstand feels almost tender. Not because it was pleasant, but because it was hopeful. People have always tried, with the tools available, to keep disorder at bay. Then there is the object under the bed, because domestic history likes to keep at least one foot planted in reality. The chamber pot sits hidden but not truly concealed, a neat ceramic compromise between elegance and necessity. It has a lid. It may have a floral motif, as if decoration might encourage gratitude. It does not, yet its presence tells you more about 19th century life than many grander objects ever could. Modern life is full of systems so hidden that you forget bodies create problems daily. The Victorian house had no such luxury. It managed the body directly, and then trained everyone to behave as though nothing at all had happened. You do not have to linger over the chamber pot to understand it. It is enough to feel the shift it creates in the mood of the room. Politeness remains, so does reality, the age-adored refinement. But refinement often meant placing a curtain in front of inconvenience, rather than removing it completely. In wealthy households, the pot would be emptied by a servant with professional silence. In poorer homes, it might be a shared and unglamorous fact of daily life. Either way, the body did not become invisible merely because society wished to speak elegantly. That is one of the quiet lessons this house keeps teaching. Under every smooth social surface lives maintenance. And now, because sleep stories should never hold discomfort too tightly, let the room soften again. The water is cold there, not here. The floor is cold there, not here. You are only visiting by imagination. The basin, the towel, the hidden little ceramic indignity beneath the bed can all remain safely inside the old house, while you listen from a much kinder century. Beyond the curtain, dawn is brightening. Somewhere in the hall, a small bell rings. Footsteps answer it. The day moves on. A knock sounds at the door. Gentle but prompt enough to make clear that this household respects order more than lingering. A maid enters carrying additional hot water, or perhaps the garments laid out for the morning, and she does so with that peculiar Victorian talent for being both present and almost erased by training. Her apron is clean, her sleeves are rolled in a practical line beneath the black dress. Her hair is contained with determined neatness. She is awake in the full sense of the word, while you are still only arriving into consciousness by degrees. If she notices the chamber pot, or the disorder of the bed, or the awkwardness of your half-finished toilet, her face shows nothing. Discretion is part of the work. Servants in households like this move through the house as if along channels cut specially for them. They knew which staircases to use, which doors to enter, which rooms to prepare in which order, and how to remain available without seeming to exist too strongly. The effect, from the family's perspective, was a kind of domestic magic. Fires burned, tea appeared, boots were polished, curtains were drawn, beds were made, but the magic was composed of backs, wrists, blisters, memorized routines, and hours of labor beginning before dawn. A properly run Victorian home depended on a choreography of service so constant that the people benefiting from it could easily mistake effort for nature. Once the maid has gone, the next transformation begins. Clothes in 1875 are not an afterthought. They are a discipline. They do not merely cover the body, they instruct it. If you imagine yourself dressed as a woman of comfortable means, the process begins close to the skin, with chemise and drawers. Then the corset, then petticoats, perhaps a bustle, then the dress bodice and skirt, then cuffs, collar, boots, gloves, maybe a ribbon or brooch or chain. If you imagine yourself dressed as a man, there is less engineering but no true carelessness. Shirt first, then trousers held by braces, then waistcoat, collar, cravat or tie, coat, polished boots, watch, gloves, hat, eye. The age was suspicious of spontaneity in fabric. The corset has gathered so much myth around itself that the ordinary reality is almost more interesting than the legend. Not every corset crushed ribs or produced dramatic fainting. Many were worn as everyday structure, fitted according to habit and fashion. Yet even the moderate corset alters the terms on which the body moves through the morning. Breath becomes shallower, posture becomes mandatory, bending, twisting, lifting and lounging all require negotiation. Clothing in this house does not merely shape how you look. It shapes what kinds of movement count as normal. The same is true, in a different way, of a man's high collar, fitted coat, and close-cut boots. Everyone respectable is being gently arranged into social acceptability by cloth. The business of fastening all this can take time. Hooks catch, buttons resist, laces tighten, pins are adjusted, a dress sleeve must fall correctly at the wrist. A collar must not gape, a hem must sit just so. In prosperous households, maids and valet serve as extensions of the family's public face. They know how to lace, tie, smooth, and rescue a misbehaving garment from becoming a misbehaving impression. The finished result always seems simple. That is the trick of it. Victorian presentation aimed to conceal the labor of presentation itself. At last you stand before the little mirror and discover that the morning has altered you into someone more formal than the sleepy person who first lifted the blanket. The clothes do part of the thinking for you. They ask for restraint, and so restraint arrives. They ask for measured gestures, and so your hands begin to move with more economy. There is discomfort in this, certainly, but there is also a kind of emotional architecture. The age did not trust the unframed self. It preferred identity to be buttoned, laced, brushed, and tied before breakfast. You step into the corridor, and the house feels different now that you are dressed for it. Portraits line the walls in oval frames, their subjects arranged with grave affection. There is a grandfather clock on the landing. There is a runner down the stairs, though it shifts just enough underfoot to keep you humble. The banister is cold beneath the hand. From below comes the smell of toast and tea, and something more substantial being kept warm under silver covers. One of the odd beauties of domestic history is how often hunger and architecture meet. The whole lower floor seems to be inhaling breakfast. In the dining room, the day becomes brighter. Curtains are opened enough to admit the pale morning. A coal fire sends out the first true warmth you have felt since waking. The table is laid with white linen, silver cutlery, cups and saucers, thin enough to ring if touched too sharply. A teapot inside a cozy, toast in a rack, covered dishes waiting with composed secrecy. Breakfast in a Victorian household of means is not the hurried modern affair of a spoon over the sink and a glance at the clock. It is a proper institution: porridge, eggs, fish, ham, kidneys, bread, preserves, sometimes kidguri, sometimes cold meats, sometimes things that seem designed less to delight than to fortify. The meal belongs to a culture that expected bodies to withstand colder rooms. Heavier clothes, fewer snacks, and longer morning. You sit, and immediately the room begins instructing you. The chair does not tolerate slouching. The placement of cutlery implies knowledge. The timing of conversation is governed by invisible rules. Even the newspaper resting nearby has a seriousness to it that makes modern headlines seem excitable by comparison. Here the day is taken up in print through long columns: parliamentary matters, market notices, shipping intelligence, deaths, arrivals, sermons, and reports from other places that arrive not instantly but eventually. Information has weight because it traveled to get here. Tea provides the first real pocket of comfort. The cup warms your fingers. Steam rises in a soft pale thread. Milk turns the color gently. Sugar, if used, sweetens not only the drink but the hour. This may be one reason tea became such an emotional anchor in British life. It offered heat, pause, and ceremony in one manageable vessel. Even in houses where feeling was tightly managed, a cup of tea could be openly welcomed. Around you, the household performs breakfast conversation. The weather is always available, so are remarks about trains, flowers, the health of an aunt, the lateness of a season, the quality of a sermon, the uncertain prospects of a distant cousin. Such topics may sound small, but in polite society, smallness was often strategic. Safe subjects created a shared surface on which people could meet without risking too much of themselves too early. Whole books were written to guide proper speech. The century feared vulgarity, impropriety, forwardness, and emotional excess with such dedication that even breakfast could feel like a soft examination. A maid appears soundlessly at one side, replenishes the toast, lifts a cover, removes a plate, fills a cup. She does not interrupt because the Victorian service ideal was interruptionlessness itself. Yet the meal could not exist without her and the others below stairs. In the kitchen, the range has been hot for hours. Bread has been sliced, porridge stirred, eggs watched, dishes timed, trays assembled, pans scoured. Knives will be washed, tablecloth crumbs will be shaken out, fires will be encouraged in rooms the family has not yet entered. One of the house's most impressive illusions is that of effortless calm. Breakfast reveals how costly that illusion was. If you stay with the table a little longer, more of its meaning begins to appear. There's the toast rack, which seems like a small unnecessary flourish until you remember that hot bread left flat on a plate quickly loses the little crisp dignity breakfast asks of it. There is the butter dish, heavy and cool. There are preserved jars that catch the window light in shades of amber and red. There is the silver itself, which asks to be polished and repolished in order to look as though it has never known tarnish. Even the napkins say something about the house. They have been folded by hands that are not now sitting at the table. They have been laundered, starched, dried, and pressed. The visible calm of the meal is made not just of food, but of preparation, extending far beyond the moment of eating. Victorian dining rooms often carried a faint ceremonial echo, even at breakfast. The sideboard might hold extra plates, folded linen, croutes, and serving pieces waiting for their turn. Glass-fronted cabinets could display china not needed every day, but important to own. A warming dish or cover kept heat where heat wished to escape. It is easy to romanticize these objects because they are handsome and well-made. Yet each one also belongs to the practical campaign against inconvenience. Bread cools, tea weakens, butter hardens in cold weather, rooms lose warmth. Time passes over food, whether one is ready or not. Domestic order was, among other things, a battle against cooling, wilting, staining, and delay. From the family's place at table, all of this resolves into atmosphere. From the servant side of the room, it resolves into timing. A good breakfast is not merely cooked, it is shepherded toward the right minute. Toast must not sit too long, tea must not stew too long, dishes meant to arrive warm must not become apologetic before they cross the threshold. In houses of comfort, one of the least acknowledged talents was the ability to make difficult timing look natural. A maid who entered exactly when needed and vanished before being thought about was not only serving, she was preserving the illusion that the meal unfolded on its own. And behind the dining room there were the secondary spaces that kept such meals possible. A tree, perhaps cool and orderly, where china, glass, linens, and silver lived under strict supervision. Shelves lined with labeled jars, a dresser holding stacks of plates in graduated sizes, drawers for napkins and cloths, cupboards with tea caddies, sugar nippers, reserve candles, serving forks, ladles, cruet stands. The Victorian house loved specialized storage because it loved proving that every object knew its proper place. A disorderly pantry would have felt to many households like a moral symptom rather than a mere inconvenience. Even leftovers carried significance. Cold ham from one meal might return differently trimmed at another. Bones became stock, bread became toast, crumbs, pudding, stuffing, or feed for other needs. In prosperous homes there was more waste than the poor could afford, but thrift still dressed itself as virtue. Domestic manuals advised the mistress of the house to understand economy, whether or not she ever stood over the scullery sink herself. Respectability was expensive, but it liked to call itself prudent. So breakfast is not simply a pleasant morning interlude. It is a little exhibition of the entire household system in miniature. Fuel, labor, class, etiquette, appetite, timing, order, all gathered around one fire and one table while the day is still young enough to seem manageable. Perhaps that is why the scene remains so vivid in memory. A Victorian breakfast room contains almost the whole century in reduced form, if you look at it slowly enough. Beyond the dining room, if you could slip quietly below stairs, The other version of morning would be underway in full. The kitchen would be warmer than anywhere above, fragrant with toast, hot iron, damp tea leaves, and soap. Copper pans would catch the range light, a cook with powerful forearms and a practical understanding of every appetite in the house might be giving orders without needing to raise her voice. A scullery maid could be at work where the real labor accumulates, among the washing up, the blacking of grates, the hauling of hot water, the endless return of grease and ash. This, too, is Victorian domestic life, though portraits and novels have often preferred the rooms upstairs. History grows gentler when listened to half asleep, but it does not disappear. It only lowers its voice. After breakfast, people do not simply remain seated until the day is finished. Victorian houses divide time into rooms. There is a morning room for lighter occupation, a drawing room or parlor for receiving and display, perhaps a study for reading and male seriousness, a nursery in households with children, bedchambers above, service rooms below, corridors connecting all these little territories of rank and purpose. The architecture teaches behavior. You move where the hour instructs you to move. One does not sprawl through a Victorian day. One proceeds through it. The morning room is softer than the dining room, though not by much. Here the chairs are lighter, the light a little clearer, the mood less ceremonial. A work basket rests near one seat. A small table holds letters awaiting replies. A vase contains whatever the garden could still spare. There may be a canary near the window or a fern doing its best in a climate not designed for tropical dreams. Someone takes up embroidery. Someone else sorts correspondence with a paper knife and a look of mild import. The atmosphere is industrious in the decorative sense. Useful activity, but useful activity conducted in such a way that nobody seems to be exerting themselves too visibly. Letter writing was once a large and delicate part of domestic life. Invitations, regrets, acknowledgments, condolences, congratulations, confirmations of calls, notes of thanks, inquiries after health, updates from relatives, responses to those updates. All of it moved by hand and horse and habit. A person's social world could be maintained or neglected through penmanship, timing, and tone. How swiftly you replied mattered, whether you phrased a sentence warmly or merely correctly mattered. Paper itself mattered, even waiting mattered more than it does now, because waiting was built into the system. In a Victorian morning room, a pile of letters is not clutter. It is a map of obligation, and so the room settles into its own small symphony. Pages unfold, teacups touch saucers, needles make their faint clicking sound. A pen scratches over good paper. Outside the window, the garden looks damp and restrained, as though it too has been brought up to understand propriety. Conversation rises and falls in measured turns. Nobody says too much. Nobody says too little if they can help it. The danger of polite society is not open conflict, but misplacement. A remark too sharp, too personal, too eager, or too modern in spirit might hover in the air longer than intended. Better, then, to speak gently of weather, blooms, parish news, journeys, and books everyone agrees are acceptable. The newspapers can enter here as well, opened and held wide like small walls. News in the 19th century had a slower pulse, but not a lesser reach. Empire, politics, industry, disease, shipping, mining, sermons, scandals, discoveries, all could arrive on the morning page. Though filtered through the print culture of the time, one person reads aloud a paragraph, another makes an understated remark, a third lifts an eyebrow at some item concerning Parliament or foreign affairs or local health. Even in quiet houses, the outer world seeped in, though never at the speed or volume to which you are accustomed. There's something almost luxurious in that slowness. A mind could still belong to one room for more than 3 minutes at a time. If the household contains children, their existence might be felt more than seen at this hour. Victorian childhood depended heavily on class in a prosperous home. Young children might spend much of the day in a nursery, under the care of a nurse or a governess, emerging into family rooms at selected times and under selected standards of neatness. Their toys would not be scattered across the main carpet as an argument for self-expression. They would be arranged, contained, put away. A hoop by the wall, tiny boots on a tray, a picture book closed carefully on a side table. Even childhood here is supervised by furniture. From time to time you become aware again of your clothes. The collar against the neck, the pressure at the waist, the insistence of boots that have not yet agreed with the shape of your feet. Victorian dress was designed to make a body legible to others, not necessarily comfortable to itself. Yet the room encourages stillness, and stillness, after a while, produces its own form of peace. You stop wanting to move quickly. You stop expecting that every moment must entertain you. The morning room teaches a forgotten pace, not idleness exactly, but unhurried existence. A clock can strike the quarter hour and leave no one feeling behind. There were other small tasks that naturally belonged to such a room. Mending, for instance, was far less invisible in the 19th century than it is now. Stockings needed darning, cuffs frayed, gloves split, buttons loosened. A hem might require attention before a dress could safely appear in public again. Fabric represented money, labor, and social appearance all at once. So clothing was rarely discarded at the first sign of trouble. It was repaired, turned, altered, trimmed, and made serviceable again. One can imagine a basket near the chair with thread, tape, spare buttons, scraps of ribbon, and little folded papers containing hooks or eyes. Domestic peace often depended on these quiet acts of maintenance, no less than on tea or coal. Then there were the account books, which may not sound soothing until you picture them properly. A narrow ledger on a side table, pages ruled into columns. Dates written in brown ink, small sums for butcher, baker, coal merchant, laundress, lamp oil, school materials, postage, ribbons, repairs. A household of means still had to think about money constantly, even if it did so in a composed voice. The mistress of the house, in many cases, was expected to understand the domestic economy with at least enough authority to prevent waste. Check deliveries, oversee linen, judge servants, and keep respectable life within its assigned limits. The elegant surface of home rested on arithmetic almost as much as on linen. In a family with daughters, the morning room might also carry the faint educational pressure of accomplishment. A girl of the middle or upper classes was not meant to be idle in the crude sense. She was meant to become skilled in acceptable things. French perhaps, though often more decorative than fluent. Piano, though not necessarily with artistic ambition. Drawing or watercolor, needlework, letter writing in a hand that suggested refinement without affectation. Reading that improved the mind, but did not unmoor the morals. Her day therefore moved through a soft cage of useful gentility. The room, so peaceful in hindsight, could also be a workshop where femininity was rehearsed by the hour. A governess might sometimes appear in or near such a space, one of the most curious figures in Victorian domestic life. Neither servant in the ordinary sense, nor family in any comfortable sense. She lived in the narrow strip between dependence and education. Paid to shape the minds and manners of children who might outrank her socially, she belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. The house could not easily decide how visible to make her. Yet, governesses were essential to the rhythm of many homes, carrying grammar, geography, penmanship, music practice, deportment, and quiet loneliness from room to room. The more time you spend in the morning room, the more clearly you feel that the Victorian day was built from tiny civilizing motions repeated until they seem natural. Fold the letter, sand the ink, tie the ribbon, mend the cuff, close the account book, trim the loose thread, place the paper knife back where it belongs. Such gestures may look trivial from a distance, but daily life is always made of trivialities performed with enormous seriousness. The only difference is that another century leaves those trivialities behind in objects strange enough for you to notice them again. And because the room is so calm, its smallest sounds become companions. The soft pull of thread, the thin tap of the paper knife on the table, a bird outside the window, the dull faraway movement of work in some unseen part of the house, the faint settling of fabric when someone shifts in a chair. This is history at its sleepiest and perhaps at its truest. Not battles or proclamations, but domestic time passing through hands. By late morning, the household may drift toward the parlor or drawing room. And with that move, the house becomes less practical and more performative. Parlors in the 19th century were spaces of display, conversation, and controlled leisure. The chairs are finer, the wallpaper richer, the mantel more dressed. Little tables hold albums, shells, ornamental boxes, perhaps a glass dome protecting some arrangement of wax flowers or dried fern. There are antimacassars on the chairs, evidence that even hair oil required household negotiation. The room wants to suggest taste, culture, order, and sufficient income to maintain objects whose main function is to prove that main functions are not always necessary. You sit where indicated, and the chair proves instantly that beauty and ease were never close relatives in this century. Yet the room has its own kind of luxury. The carpet is thick, the curtains deepen the light into something flattering. The fire, if lit, gives the whole scene an amber hot. Conversation here is gentler in tone, but sharper in implication. This is where people are observed while pretending merely to pass an hour. A person's glove leather, pronunciation, references, posture, and manner of listening all carry information. Victorian society liked to imagine class as something natural, yet it was forever policing tiny performative signs to reassure itself that breeding could still be recognized. Someone may take up a piece of needlework, someone else may leaf through an album of photographs, those stiff little cartes de visite in which everybody looks patient, composed, and slightly over-acquainted with mortality. Perhaps there is a piano in the corner. If so, it exists both as an instrument and as a social possibility. Middle and upper-class domestic culture prized music as evidence of cultivation. A daughter might be invited to play. A guest might be gently cornered into singing. A hymn, a sentimental ballad, a salon piece, something modest and familiar. The performance need not be brilliant, it only needs to occur with grace. The piano opens another layer of the house. Once the notes begin, even hesitant ones, they travel through the rooms and staircases in a way conversation never quite does. Music touches the hall, the landing, the closed doors above, the distant service passages below. A house listens differently to music than it does to speech. You can imagine a maid pausing for a second in the corridor with a folded cloth in her hand, hearing the melody through the wall before going on. You can imagine a child in the nursery catching the tune and storing it away. You can imagine the older members of the family recognizing a song from years before and not saying so aloud. This is also the hour when boredom, that underappreciated historical sensation, begins to reveal itself. Modern life often fears boredom so intensely that it fills every silence with a scream. The Victorians endured more of it than their furniture admits. There were long afternoons of weather, reading, sewing, waiting, practicing, paying calls, making calls, listening, performing steadiness. Yet boredom is not always the enemy of peace. Sometimes it is the doorway to it when nothing much happens. The senses notice subtler things. The tiny hiss in the lamp, the shape of light on wallpaper, the rhythm of knitting needles, the regular ticking of the mantel clock. A sleep story can borrow that gift from the past. It can let not much happen for a while and trust that the stillness is enough. By now, the house has been inhabited for several waking hours, and the thought of stepping outdoors begins to feel like relief. Someone suggests taking the air, which in Victorian language is both an outing and a prescription. Fresh air was believed to strengthen the nerves, purify the body, improve the spirits, and counter the unhealthy staleness of close interiors. This belief belonged partly to medicine, partly to morality, and partly to the universal human pleasure of leaving one room for another, with a better ceiling. Hats are fetched, gloves adjusted, a shawl settled, a coat buttoned. The front door opens. Outside, the garden receives you in a mood of damp restraint. Gravel darkened by dew crunches underfoot in a careful, satisfying way. Hedges are clipped, borders edged, paths shaped to look natural only after considerable labor. A few late roses linger with that valiant tiredness flowers sometimes wear at the end of a season. The grass holds a pearly film of moisture. Beyond the wall or hedge lies the street with its occasional hoofbeat, distant wheels, and the faint smoke of neighboring chimneys. The sky is a mild gray, not dramatic enough to dominate the morning, only present enough to cool it. Victorian gardens were rarely meant to look wild. Nature, like children and servants and emotions, was admired most when properly managed. Wealthier homes might boast conservatories, ferneries, ornamental ponds, imported specimens, even artful ruins designed to suggest romantic decay, without any of the inconvenience of actual collapse. More modest homes still liked order, trim beds, defined walks, a bench placed where the light fell well, a little greenhouse with panes clouded by condensation. The garden was not merely outdoor space. It was a visible extension of the household's claim to cultivation. You walk slowly because the clothes ask it, and the moment allows it. The air smells of wet soil, leaves, and coal from the town beyond. Conversation lightens outdoors. It becomes easier to remark on weather, branches, buds, birds, and season than it was to invent another safe sentence over the breakfast table. Here scenery does some of the work. A robin flits along the hedge. Ivy darkens a wall. A greenhouse window reflects a pale version of the sky. The entire walk feels like a longer exhale after rooms full of careful posture. Even the way you leave the house says something about the age. Beside the door there may be a boot scraper, a modest iron fitting meant to spare the carpet from mud and horse-soiled streets. It is one of those objects that seems almost comic until you remember how close the outdoors was to the indoors in practical terms. Roads were dirtier, traffic had animals in it, rain lingered in hems and on steps. A respectable threshold was a border constantly defended against the material world. The scraper, the mat, the umbrella stand, the tiled entry, all were pieces of a campaign to keep disorder outside and cleanliness visible within. From the garden or from the front path, the house also reveals its social face more clearly than it does from inside. Curtains signal privacy but also prosperity. Clean steps suggest discipline. Polished knockers suggest pride. Window glass itself, when kept shining, tells the street that someone inside has both standards and the labor to support them. Victorian neighborhoods read one another in facades. A slightly peeling frame, an untended path, a brass plate gone dull, these could become silent evidence of decline or negligence. Respectability lived partly in public surfaces. If you linger at the gate in imagination, the street offers a broader picture of the world feeding this quiet domestic scene. A costermonger calling goods, a cart creaking under deliveries, the distant ring of a blacksmith's work, laundry lines behind smaller houses, a crossing sweeper hoping for a penny, newsboys, messengers, tradesmen whose rounds stitched the neighborhood together. Milk, bread, coal, fish, flowers, letters, all had to arrive physically. Comfort was a network long before it was a button, and depending on where exactly this house stands, one might sense different versions of Victorian life pressing close to one another. A respectable terrace only a short distance from harsher streets. A merchant's home not far from warehouses, rail yards, or river traffic. Churches and gin shops, drapers and pawnbrokers, schools and workrooms. The century had little talent for separating elegance from the labor that financed it. It simply preferred not to discuss the connection over tea. On some days, a walk outdoors might extend beyond the garden into a promenade or a short turn through the neighborhood, where seeing and being seen mattered almost as much as the air itself. A lady's pace, a gentleman's hat, a child's glove buttoned correctly, all joined a social script. Walking was movement, but it was also display. You were not only stretching the body, you were presenting the household to the world in a mobile form. This is part of why the fresh air feels so valuable in the story. It opens the scale. Indoors, the Victorian day can seem all curtains and porcelain and etiquette. Outdoors, the wider machinery of the century appears. Streets, labor, class, trade, soot, weather, neighbors, noise held at a decent distance. The house does not float free of that world. It only filters it. And once you understand that, the quiet rooms inside grow even more interesting, because you can feel what they are trying to hold back. This is also where the house begins to acquire memory. You glance up and see one upper window not fully opened, its curtain caught differently from the others. Perhaps it belongs to a room seldom used, perhaps to one always kept ready for a family member now living elsewhere. Victorian homes carried absence quietly. An empty room might remain arranged for years. A brush on a dressing table, a shawl in a drawer smelling faintly of lavender. A photograph half hidden among books. Mourning, illness, and departure visited households more directly than they do in the romantic version of the past. Yet daily life went on around them. A garden walk could pass beneath a window, weighted with memory, and continue politely to the next flower bed. Near the far edge of the path, there may be a bench, slightly damp, or a little summer house, or a view toward neighboring roofs and chimneys. Standing there, you understand something about the Victorian idea of hell. It was not merely bodily, it was moral, atmospheric, social. One was supposed to breathe well, behave well, present well, keep proper hours, move in clean company, and avoid extremes. The whole culture had a deep faith in moderation, though it enforced that faith with immoderate enthusiasm. The garden is where the ideal looks most convincing. Quiet paths, fresh air, controlled beauty, a body moving decorously through it all. When the household goes back inside, the change is immediate. Wet smells stay behind the door, coal smoke and polished wood return. The hall feels dimmer after the garden, even though it is the same hall. A servant takes out her garments, another moves past with a tray. Somewhere overhead a door closes. The day's approaching its middle now, and with it comes one of the most finely tuned forms of Victorian activity. The social calling was not casual visiting in the modern sense. It was social geometry. Timing mattered, duration mattered, dress mattered, whether you were at home mattered, and whether you were at home but not receiving mattered in a different and more interesting way. Cards were left, names printed or engraved, sometimes with corners turned according to custom. A person could be acknowledged, encouraged, cooled, avoided, or quietly erased through the rituals of calling without anyone raising a voice. The whole system was a masterpiece of polite ambiguity. Calling cards alone could tell entire little stories. A card left in person said one thing, a card sent by servant said another. A married woman's card differed from a gentleman's. A card could be left after a dinner, after an introduction, after a death, after an arrival in town, after a marriage, after a slight that required smoothing over without ever admitting the slight had occurred. Corners were turned in some customs to signal that the caller had appeared personally rather than dispatching the duty to someone else. Even the tray in the front hall, where cards accumulated, became a quiet theater of rank, memory, and strategy. Who had called, who had returned the call, who had not, who was perhaps being cooled without open offense. The visit itself often lasted only long enough to affirm the relationship, and no longer. This brevity can seem odd to a modern mind trained to think that sincerity requires depth. Victorian social life often believed the opposite, forms sustained society. One did not have to pour out the soul in every drawing room. One had to demonstrate proper recognition, proper timing, and proper regard. Emotion could live elsewhere. Politeness here functioned as a bridge sturdy enough to carry many relationships that intimacy alone would never have supported. Yet the strain of it must have been real. Imagine an afternoon in which several such calls are paid. Each requires clothing, travel, recollection of family names, awareness of recent events, guarded talk, and the continual adjustment of warmth to just the right degree. Too much enthusiasm could appear vulgar. Too little could seem cold. Even facial expression had to be managed within a narrow and carefully furnished corridor. Carriages waiting outside these houses formed their own little social punctuation. A horse stamping in the road, harness lightly jingling, wheels wet from recent rain, a driver up front, more patient than comfortable. Vehicles linked homes into a network of ritual movement. To modern eyes, the carriage can look romantic. To the body inside it, especially after the third call of the day, it may have felt more like an upholstered pause between performances. And while the callers performed gentility above, servants in each house translated that gentility into quick material action. Doors opened, names taken, cards received, coats accepted, tea sent for. If the visit rose to that level, chairs arranged, fire checked, hall table kept presentable. Household order had to adapt in moments to the arrival of outsiders. Respectability was not static, it was reactive, always ready to receive judgment through the front door. Perhaps that is why returning home from a call feels so restful in the story, even when nothing dramatic has happened. The self has been held upright in public, and may now lean, inwardly, if not physically, against familiar walls again. The old house, for all its demands, still offers the special comfort of belonging to one known set of rooms after being politely displayed in another. So once more you are dressed for movement, settling into a carriage, or taking a short drive through streets lined with brick houses, shop signs, drays, children, delivery carts, and the dense practical life that supported domestic gentility at every turn. The carriage itself sways with old-fashioned conviction over the road. Through the window, the town passes not as a blur, but in episodes. A butcher's sign, laundry strung behind a narrow yard, a church tower in the distance, men in coats and hats, moving with newspapers folded under an arm, women with baskets or parcels, a boy rolling a hoop, chimney smoke crossing the pale sky in wavering bands. The world has more friction than yours. Everything takes a little longer to reach its destination. At the neighboring house, the ritual begins again in a different key. Another front step, another maid, another hall table, another parlor arranged for the reception of carefully bounded humanity. The wallpaper here may have birds instead of vine. The chairs may be less severe, though not enough to confuse you. A spaniel might sleep near the hearth, as if to assure everyone that warmth is possible, even if social ease is not. The hostess arrives with practiced kindness. Names are exchanged if needed, though often everyone already knows more about everyone else than they will ever say aloud. Tea may appear again, because tea is capable of serving as beverage, punctuation, shield, reward, and social bridge all at once. Conversation in such a room moves like a carriage on a narrow lane. It must keep going, but cannot safely widen too far. Weather is discussed first because weather rarely takes offense. Then flowers, a recent concert, a charitable bazaar, a sermon, a publication, a journey undertaken by some cousin, a household improvement, a mutual acquaintance's health. Topics to avoid hover invisibly around the acceptable ones. Money, sharp politics, religion in the passionate sense, bodily matters, scandal spoken too plainly. The system produces a strange effect. Very little can be said outright, and yet a great deal can be implied. Tone becomes almost as important as language. There is something exhausting in this, though the exhaustion arrives softly. One must keep the face agreeable, the posture upright, the voice measured, the eyes attentive. Modern fatigue often comes from speed and noise. Victorian fatigue could come from containment. The self held in trim for hours at a time. Even an ordinary visit could leave the spirit feeling as though it had been gently folded and placed back in a drawer. When you take your leave, with the right number of polite words and the proper unhurried movements, the return carriage feels almost luxurious in its silence. Wheels strike the road, the horse exhales, houses pass, nobody needs to say anything for a few minutes. You can look out at the town and feel the afternoon beginning to lean toward gentleness. In the distance, smoke softens the edges of roofs. Washing hangs behind some poor row of houses where comfort is much less upholstered. A factory chimney speaks the blunt industrial truth on which so many respectable drawing rooms depended. The age could produce velvet curtains and grim labor at the same time, and think them unrelated if observed from the right side of the wall. Back home, the house seems quieter than before, as though it too has grown a little tired of maintaining itself. The middle of the day brings a softer domestic rhythm. There may be a light luncheon or a tray set out in a smaller room. Perhaps cold meats, bread, pickles, pie, broth, or whatever the household regards as sufficient between more ceremonious meals. Victorian food culture was rarely built around delicacy for its own sake. It liked substance. A person was expected to be fed adequately for climate, clothing, and duty, even if the result could occasionally feel as though the meal had been designed by a committee of practical uncles. After this, the house enters one of its drowsier states. Some family member may retire to the study to read. Another may take up needlework. A younger daughter might practice scales upstairs. A governess somewhere may be guiding a lesson in French verbs or geography or scripture with patient severity. In the nursery, if there are children, the day follows its own regimen of meals, naps, copybooks, picture lessons, and supervised play. In the stillness between larger events, the house reveals its deeper character. Drawers opening, a coal bucket being set down, soft steps on the back stair, distant page turning from the library, the kind of sounds that form the real biography of a building. The library, or study, if you enter it in imagination, is one of the most soothing rooms of all. Books line the walls in dark rows. The air smells of paper, leather, dust, and the lingering ghost of tobacco in households where gentlemen have made use of such privileges. A desk stands near the window, with pens, blotting paper, envelopes, perhaps a magnifying glass, perhaps ledgers, perhaps a stack of correspondence requiring answers. Here the century's self-image gathers itself: serious reading, account-keeping, maps, moral improvement, family histories, sermons, poetry, manuals on proper conduct, travel books written by people who often understood empire as scenery. Even the silence in a Victorian library feels educated, and yet the most moving objects may be smaller ones. A photograph tucked into a book, a dried flower used as a marker, an inscription on the flyleaf in careful ink, a lock of hair hidden in a drawer. The Victorians were tender custodians of memory, particularly where death was concerned. Mourning customs could be elaborate, visible, and long-lasting. Black clothes, memorial jewelry, saved letters, draped mirrors, carefully preserved tokens. Because death visited more often, memory lived more openly among the objects of daily life. A house like this contains not only the living arrangement of rooms, but the stored affection of those no longer moving through them. As afternoon bends toward tea, the entire mood softens again. Curtains draw some of the low light into gentler angles. The day outside pales into gold or pearl, depending on weather. The teapot appears once more, because no social architecture in Britain ever truly improved upon the teapot. Cups are set out, a cake or two, bread and butter perhaps, scones if the household inclines that way, jam in a small dish, cream, thin slices of something savory. The meal is lighter than breakfast and less armored than dinner. It offers one of the day's most human pauses. Tea also brings out some of the house's gentler objects. A biscuit tin with a painted lid, a cake stand raised slightly above the table as if small sweets deserve elevation. Delicate plates brought out for the hour and returned afterward to cupboards, where they continue their quiet careers as evidence of care. A sugar bowl with tongs or spoon resting just so, a little milk jug with its own modest grace. Victorian domestic culture excelled at turning repeated needs into miniature ceremonies, and tea may have been its most successful achievement in that regard. The hour required no grand justification. It simply returned each day and made fatigue appear civilized. The accounts of many 19th century households suggest how emotionally important these repeated pauses could become. Between the more rigid bookends of morning duty and evening formality, tea offered a middle state in which one could be orderly without being braced. Children, when admitted, might feel the atmosphere and grow quieter under it. Older relatives could be more comfortably indulged in their stories. Small aches, disappointments, and social irritations of the day softened in the presence of hot drink and low light. The body responds kindly to ritual when ritual is warm. The room itself changes as tea proceeds. The outdoor light lowers. Shadows gather in the corners before anyone remarks on them. The fire begins to matter again. Lamp glass reflects tiny versions of flame. Fabric deepens in color. Even voices seem to travel less distance, as though the room has drawn closer around the people in it. This is the hour when domestic interiors become almost theatrical in their beauty, yet remain intimate enough to soothe rather than impress. It is also an hour for albums, baskets, and other containers of household memory. A work basket may carry half-finished lace or wool in subdued colors. An album might hold pressed flowers, favorite verses copied out, visiting cards, little sketches, or photographs slipped in beside the official portraits. Parlors and drawing rooms often accumulated not only objects but traces of repetition. The same teacups, the same lamp, the same shawl on the same chair back, the same place by the fire claimed, quietly and almost permanently, by the same person night after night. Familiarity is one of the true luxuries of home, and tea makes it visible. Meanwhile, below stairs, the house is entering another round of labor. Trays must be washed, crumbs cleared, dinner preparations continue, vegetables trimmed, puddings watched, coals hauled, napery checked, silver positioned, knives counted, bells answered. The upper rooms may feel hushed and rosy with gratitude, but the lower regions of the house are moving faster now. Victorian domestic comfort is always a duet between pause and effort, one heard and one largely hidden. Perhaps this is why the tea hour remains so restorative in the mind. It sits exactly at the point where the day might harden into fatigue, and instead offers a low, bright bridge across it. Not enough to erase the effort of living, but enough to make effort feel briefly companionable. People sit nearer together at tea than at breakfast. The light is kinder, hunger is quieter, the day's outer obligations have mostly been met. Here talk can loosen slightly without losing its manners. A cousin may be described as eccentric rather than impossible. A curate may be called earnest in a tone that means harmlessly dull. Someone mentions a neighbor's new wallpaper, which becomes an acceptable way of discussing deeper concerns about taste, money, ambition, and social assent without appearing cruel. Victorian conversation had many indirect roots, but tea made them seem almost charming. Perhaps a photograph album is passed around, a little cards are slid from their sleeves and admired. Here is an uncle with formidable whiskers. Here a school friend in a striped dress. Here a brother in uniform looking younger than memory permits. These portraits do not smile much, but they are not truly joyless. Early photography required stillness, and stillness became part of the period's aesthetic. Looking at them now, you sense not coldness, but patience. The sitters waited to be seen later by people they could not imagine. You are one of those people now, Twilight is the hour when the Victorian house becomes most seductive from a distance. Lamps are lit, gas jets bloom into soft, steady flames behind glass. Candles join them in some rooms, especially where atmosphere and gentility prefer a flicker to a hiss. Firelight deepens on brass and wood. The windows turn into black mirrors, portraits recede, corridors glow at the center and darken at the edges. Even inconvenience looks beautiful in low light. This may be why so many later generations have romanticized such interiors. Dusk forgives a great deal. It smooths over smoke, labor, and cold, leaving only warmth where the eye happens to rest. Servants are busiest at this hour, though the house rarely pauses to applaud. Lamps need tending, curtains adjusted, fires strengthened for evening rooms. Dressing water prepared, bells answered, dining room laid, shoes removed from hallways, ash carried away, coal brought up, plates warmed, every degree of comfort visible above stairs corresponds to work moving more quickly below. In the softer light, one can almost forget that, but history remains more honest if you remember it gently. Dinner now gathers the household into its most formal evening shape. Clothes may be changed, or at least adjusted, hair is smoothed again. A fresh collar may appear, a ribbon replaced. The dining room, seen at night, feels more enclosed and ceremonial than it did in the morning. Outside there is only darkness, perhaps rain against glass, perhaps wind in the chimney, perhaps the muffled passing of a late carriage. Inside there is linen, crystal, silver, flame, and the steady choreography of courses arriving and departing. A Victorian dinner in a comfortable home could be elaborate even when not truly grand. Soup first, then fish, then meat, vegetables, puddings, perhaps a savory, perhaps sweets, fruit, nuts, cheese, according to habit, ambition, and staff. Each course carries not only flavor, but labor. The cook below has timed heat against distance and sequence. The servants above move plates with a composure that hides the complexity of the thing. To eat in such a room is to consume coordination as much as food. The meal also reveals how deeply the age loved order at table. One did not seize, interrupt, or indulge too visibly. Appetite had to appear well-bred. Pleasure had to remain moderate enough to suggest character. Conversation moved in waves, leaving room for service to pass. The black windows beyond the candles make the room feel like a raft of light in a dark sea. After the principal courses, the shape of dinner may continue through sweets, preserved fruits, nuts, perhaps cheese, perhaps a final savory if the household follows older habits. Each stage alters the tone very slightly. Early courses are about appetite and structure. Later ones drift toward satisfaction and lingering. Glass catches flame. Silver looks almost molten in candlelight. The table, once a place of alert posture, grows slower and a touch more forgiving, as hunger settles into fullness. If the household is formal enough, the rituals after dinner carry their own little weather. Chairs shift back, napkins are laid down, servants clear in a sequence too practiced to need thought. Crumbs vanish as if removed by a discreet tide. The cloth remains white despite all that has passed over it. In some homes, decanters may appear for the gentlemen after the ladies withdraw. In others, the whole company reforms in a drawing room, where the fire seems lower and kinder than before. The intensity of the meal yields to the softness of evening occupation. Card tables might be opened on certain nights, not for noisy gambling in respectable homes, but for whist or another quiet game, able to fill an hour without disturbing decorum. Cards gave hands something to do, and minds a narrow corridor in which to move. Elsewhere, a volume may be read aloud, one person lending voice to pages while others sew, listen, or simply sit in companionable fatigue. Reading aloud was one of the great domestic technologies of the age, joining people to one another to print through the shared pace of a single voice. The fire at this hour deserves its own attention. In daylight, a fire is useful. At night, it becomes emotional architecture. It draws the eye. It offers movement that requires nothing from the observer. Coals settle, brighten, dim, and brighten again. A small flame catches along one edge of a log. Shadows shift gently over the rug. Many households must have found in evening firelight what modern people often find in screens, except that the fire asked less of the mind and returned more to the senses. Servants, meanwhile, are still carrying the structure of the evening on their shoulders. Dining room restored, glass collected, sideboard put right, kitchen heat endured a little longer, pans scrubbed, leftovers stored. Table linen set aside for laundering, coal and lamp oil calculated against tomorrow. One of the strange truths of domestic comfort is that the more peaceful a room feels, the more likely someone unseen has worked hard to keep it that way. By the time the evening settles around the fire, the household has traveled a long distance from the cold basin of morning. That journey is one reason bedtime in a Victorian house can feel unexpectedly moving. So much effort has been spent merely bringing the day to a point where people may finally sit still in light and warmth together. There is comfort in that. Human beings have always gathered around evening meals to push back the formlessness outside. The Victorians, for all their rules, understood that instinct very well. After dinner, depending on the household, the evening may divide. Ladies withdraw to the drawing room. Gentlemen linger a little longer. Or perhaps everyone drifts together by the fire in a less formal pattern than etiquette manuals would prefer. This is one of the most soothing parts of the day, because fatigue has begun to undo what propriety tightened. Voices are lower, movements slower. Nobody has the strength now for brilliant performance. The room becomes kinder, simply because the day has worn everybody down to something more genuine. Music may return. Someone at the piano plays a hymn, a simple song, a piece not too lively for the hour. Or a book is read aloud. Perhaps travel writing, perhaps poetry, perhaps some improving biography that only half the room is actually following. Sewing is gathered, a cup is refilled. The fire shifts softly in the grate. It is possible to imagine that this was how the century wished itself remembered. Not in factories, funerals, debt, or smoke, but in lamplight, family circles, and voices lowered for the evening. History is never so tidy, but the wish itself is part of the story. If you wander mentally through the house once more before bed, you notice how different each room feels now. The nursery is quiet, toys put away, small beds turned down, a night light perhaps burning low. The morning room is abandoned, except for the smell of cool tea. The hall is dim, the service passages carry the last business of the day. In a cupboard, the linen lies folded in precise white towers. In the pantry, glass and silver are being counted, wiped, or set in order for tomorrow. The old house is not going to sleep all at once. It is being shut down piece by tired hands. Upstairs, your room has become smaller and more welcoming than it seemed in the morning. The fire may have been revived just enough to take the bite from the air. The bed has been turned down. A warming pan may already have done its brief ghostly work between the sheets on a colder night. Fresh water waits again at the washstand. Curtains are drawn tightly now. The outside world has disappeared. A single lamp or candle creates an island of light over pitcher, basin, and folded linen. All the things that irritated you earlier feel softer by lamplight. Even the washstand has learned some mercy from the dark. Undressing is the true reward of the Victorian day. Hooks release. Buttons are freed. Pins are lifted out and set carefully down. Boots finally surrender their hold on the feet. The collar loosens. The corset unlaces. The body returns to itself layer by layer. And with it, the mind grows quieter. There is relief in feeling your lungs take a fuller breath. Your shoulders drop. Your waist cease to negotiate with cloth. Much of the day's social order has depended on making bodies behave. Bedtime is when the body wins back a little territory. The final washing is less of a shock now, because everything around it has slowed. Water in the basin, hands cooled, face touched lightly, hair brushed out in patient strokes that seemed to smooth not only the hair itself, but the whole day behind it. A few pins on the tray, a handkerchief folded, jewelry removed, the chamber pot. Once again, reminding you that history is most honest when it lowers its gaze and keeps going. There is no need to dramatize it. Every century has its own hidden inconveniences. This one was simply less able to hide them from furniture. In many households, this would be the hour of a final prayer, spoken aloud or held inwardly. Gratitude for safety, for family, for health where health existed, for income, if income remained, for the mercies of routine in a world more fragile than the upholstery suggested. Even people who did not think of themselves as deeply devout often lived within a rhythm shaped by prayer, church, scripture, and moral self-examination. The Victorian mind could be crowded with duty, but bedtime distilled duty into a few quiet thoughts by the bed. Listen now to the sounds of the house settling. A board contracts somewhere in the corridor, a door clicks softly below, a coal slips in the grate with a little sigh, wind moves against the outer wall. Somewhere far off a church bell marks the hour for people in houses grander or poorer than this, all lying under different blankets, all breathing the same night air by different means. The servants are not fully done yet. Someone is still covering embers, checking latches, setting out tomorrow's things, perhaps carrying away the day's last tray. The labor of comfort extends even into other people's sleep. Think for a moment of the parts of bedtime the house almost never speaks about directly. The linen that has been washed, boiled, dried, aired, folded, and stored. The mattresses turned, beaten, or mended over time. Blankets aired in good weather, curtains shaken, chamber pots emptied at dawn and made ready again by night. Fires cleaned out after use, bed warmers heated and carried carefully so that sheets might feel welcoming before a body arrived. Laundry alone could form a world within the household, great pale kingdoms of cloth, endlessly moving from bed to body to basket, to boil to line to press, and back again. The Victorian home looked still because so much had already been set in motion long before the sleepers came upstairs. Season changed these rituals too. In winter, the effort of comfort increased. Fires mattered more. Curtains were drawn earlier. Hot bricks, warming pans, heavier quilts, thicker nightwear, and additional coverings altered the relation between person and room. In summer, the problems reversed. Windows opened where they could. Air was courted. Flies became adversaries. Water jugs turned lukewarm too quickly. Fabrics that seemed protective in January felt burdensome in July. Each season taught the house new negotiations. Modern heating and cooling have hidden from you how much weather once entered ordinary sleep. Then there is the small, emotional strangeness of the bedroom itself. During the day, it may be half public in a family sense. Entered by servants, tidied, aired, supplied. At night, it turns private again, perhaps the most private place a Victorian life allowed. Here, the performed self loosens. The face no longer has to converse. The hands no longer need tasks. The body can curl, stretch, breathe more deeply, and belong to itself for a few hours. This restoration is never complete, because tomorrow will ask for the whole choreography again. Yet, it is real. The room becomes a refuge precisely because the day has been so structured elsewhere. If there are clocks in the house, their sound changes at night. By day they organize, by night they accompany. The same ticking that once kept appointments and meals in order now merely reminds the dark that it is passing. A distant bell from a church tower may answer at the quarter or the hour. Rain, if it comes, sounds larger after midnight against window glass. Wind in the chimney seems more intimate. Houses that felt impressive in daylight become vulnerable at night. All their carved solidity reduced to walls, holding off weather while sleepers trust them to keep doing so until morning. And this is where the sleep story must become gentlest of all. Because by now the old house has given what it has to give. You have walked through its rooms, worn its clothes, breathed its coal-warmed air, followed its mealtimes, listened to its clocks, and felt the quiet effort by which it kept itself respectable. Nothing more needs to happen. The final luxury, in any century, is permission to stop. So the blankets rise, the lamp lowers, the room narrows into softness. The sounds of the house grow farther apart. Whatever worries belong to 1875 can remain in 1875. Tomorrow's fires, tomorrow's letters, tomorrow's hymns to mend, tomorrow's calls to return, all may wait below the edge of sleep where you do not have to follow them. Tonight, there is only the hush of an old room and the slower hush of your own, each one fading gently into the other until neither asks for anything at all. Lying beneath the blankets, you can think back over what this one ordinary Victorian day has really been made of. Not only quaint objects, and certainly not only hardship. It has been made of maintenance, of systems run by repetition, of the body managed by cloth, posture, and patience, of meals made possible by heat and labor, of letters sustaining relationships across distance, of rooms assigned to times of day, of memory stored in drawers, albums, and old arrangements, of class made visible through how much work could be hidden from view. The house seemed solid when you first entered it. By night you understand that solidity to be a performance, constantly renewed. That perhaps is why the old house becomes more moving as you grow sleepier. It is not merely picturesque, it is vulnerable. Every comfort inside it depends on attention. The fire goes out if nobody tends it. Water does not appear unless carried. Clean linen does not fold itself. Social order must be rehearsed every day, or it frays. The people in the house do not know they are historical. They only know they are trying to get through another day with enough warmth, respectability, and routine to make tomorrow plausible. History often looks grandest from a distance and most human up close. And this is where the house begins to give you back to your own century. Notice, without effort, how much ease surrounds you now by comparison. Water that comes when asked, warmth that does not need coal carried up a stair, light at the press of a finger, clothes that rarely require another human being to help you breathe inside them. A bed that welcomes the body in its natural shape, privacy ordinary enough to ignore. The modern world has its own strains, of course, but history can still offer a small, drowsy gratitude by revealing what your daily life no longer has to negotiate. There is no need to draw a hard moral from that gratitude. Sleep stories do not close like courtroom arguments. They loosen, they fade, they leave a shape in the mind, and then let the shape soften. So let the old house drift now. Let the breakfast table dim. Let the morning room fold up its letters. Let the garden path silvered with damp disappear under shadow. Let the calling cards, the polished banister, the library shelves, the piano keys, the black windows at dinner, the folded shawl, the little tray of pins, all retreat by degrees. The upper window you noticed in the garden is dark now. The corridor portraits have lost their eyes. The hall clock goes on ticking, but from farther and farther away. The servants below are quiet at last. The coals are low. The curtains hold the night outside. Somebody in that room, in that house, in that year, has already surrendered to sleep, and the whole building seems to exhale around them. Nothing more is being asked of the day. Nothing more is being asked of you. So keep only the gentlest parts, the warm cup in your hands. The hush after the last page is turned, the release of unlacing, the small red heart of the fire at the edge of the room, the feeling of being indoors while the dark remains safely outside. Keep the slow regularity of the house as it settles beam by beam. Keep the image of one quiet room in another century where the night has finally become kind. And then let even that go. Let the staircase fade. Let the washstand fade. Let the curtain, the parlor, the carriage, the greenhouse, the letters, the silver, The soft piano notes, the last coal in the grate, all fade. Keep only the calm, keep only the warmth where you are now. Keep only the simple fact that you are here, in your own bed, in your own room, with no bell to answer and no collar to fasten and no calling card to leave and no cold pitcher waiting at dawn. The old Victorian house can stand at a great distance now, just a dark shape under an older sky, with one faint window holding a little amber light, smaller now, softer now, far enough away that even its inconveniences look gentle, far enough away that it no longer belongs to you at all, and that final small light can fade too, whenever you are ready.